Hey, this is Dave Prior. You're about to watch my interview with ProKanban CEO Colleen Johnson, who's going to do everything she can to finally get me sorted out on how to read a cumulative flow diagram. It's something I've been embarrassed about not being able to do for a very long time. So Colleen's going to get me squared away. Hopefully, if you need help with that, we'll get you sorted out too. Now, at the end of the interview, Colleen was kind enough to share some dates she had for upcoming events, but I'm really slow with editing, so those dates passed before this video got posted. So I want to let you know about some stuff she's got going on next week. So next week is the Agile conference, and Colleen's going to be there. She's leading 2 different sessions while she's there. So the first one takes place on Monday the 22nd. It's part of the Audacious Salon. It's happening from 3:45 to 5 p.m. And the title of that talk is Big Business Agile Magic. And then on Tuesday, she's got another talk, 3:45 to 5 p.m. again. 12 ways flow metrics show up in everyday life. So if you're there, you definitely want to check these out because I'm sure they're going to be great times. I will be doing interviews the whole time though. So one of my announcements is I'm going to be doing podcast interviews for the Agile Alliance at the conference all week long. So every afternoon, if you check in on LinkedIn, on the Agile Alliance website, you will find a link to the live streams of the podcast we're going to be doing from the floor with speakers and thought leaders and other folks that are there. So it should be awesome. I can't wait to get to do that again because it's been a couple of years. And I have one more announcement. It's something I'm super excited about. After spending over a year working on it, I finally have my Art of War course ready to go. So the Art of War for Collaboration is now live on the modusinstitute.com site. You can go to modusinstitute.com, search for the Art of War for Collaboration, sign up right now at a special low introductory rate of $99, which will only last until the first cohort fills. What you're going to get for that is basically the results of 30 years of field work of me trying to figure out how to take the lessons and the tools from Sun Tzu's The Art of War, take them out of the context of warfare and apply them more from a negotiation standpoint and use them at work. So if you're somebody who struggles with being in meetings where there's a lot of power distance, you can't figure out how to negotiate your role in that room, you feel like you're not in a position of strength, these tools will help you with that. If you work in an organization where you're trying to help a team collaborate, but they feel like the space isn't safe, this will help you with that. If you suffer from imposter syndrome, if you struggle just to find your place and feel like you have a position in a negotiation where you can actually deal from, this will help you with that. It's also going to help you understand yourself better as well. So I hope you'll check it out. I am very proud of the work, and I can't wait to see you in that course if you sign up. And if you're going to be at the Agile conference, please stop by and say hi. It would be great to connect with you while you're there. I'm really excited to get to Texas next week, which is not a sentence I normally say. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy this podcast.
If you learn to work the old way, but the new way is what you need, my job's to make that switch from old to new. Suck less for you than it did for me. Here on Drunken PM Radio. Whoa! Here on Drunken PM Radio. Whoa!
Welcome to The Reluctant Agilist. I'm Dave Prior, and today Colleen Johnson is going to school me up on something that I am ashamed of and embarrassed about, and I need help. So, Colleen, thank you for sparing some time in your afternoon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. I was excited you reached out about this topic and that you were willing to ask the question, because I think for a lot of folks, it's a question that everyone has and no one wants to ask.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. And I think the further you go down your career path, you're like, oh, I really should have figured that out a long time ago. So I'm going to pitch the topic in a second. Before we do that, I think it would be a good idea if we told these people what it means to be the CEO of ProKanban and what you do all day long.
What do I do all day long? Well, ProKanban.org is a learning community for Kanban. We have, we're over 130 trainers now in 35 plus different countries and offering classes in over a dozen languages. And really, ProKanban is all about creating a safe place for learning, right? I think we've all been through different parts of our career in a place where we haven't understood something or we're confused by something. And maybe it's awkward to ask, like we were just talking about with what we're going to talk about today. Or you're the new person and everybody assumes you already know all of this stuff. And so I think we've done ourselves a disservice in some ways by putting so much kind of ego up on a pedestal in the Agile community. And we really just want to chip away at that and invite people who are just curious and want to be part of this learning community, whether that's as a trainer, as a student, or just a member of the community, to be part of that. And I think the beautiful part of all of that is that we make better materials because of the community, right? We're learning all the time from people that are sharing stories or asking questions, and that makes everything that we do, I think, more practical and
More
simpler
humane.
for the people that want to learn, right?
Yeah.
It's less academic and it's more real life.
Cool.
And so it's been a really great journey where we are almost 4 years old now. So it's gone by really fast. And I think we've had kind of an interesting journey since we started during the pandemic and built a lot of learning materials and simulations for online learning. Now we're seeing like all of our trainers go, okay, how do I simulate this part of the metrics tool in a
real life environment?
So we're kind of backwards from, I think, a lot of other training organizations right now, but I think we're having a lot of fun making that push to more in-person classes right now.
Well, thank you for all the work that you do, but for making it like a safer, more humane place, and also for being patient enough with this topic. So I'm going to share the topic now, and I'm going to couch it in my historical shame of it. So when I first started teaching Agile stuff, I worked at Valtech, and I worked with this guy named Al Gerner, who was like next level super brain. And we had all these slides, and there was this cumulative flow diagram, and I look at it, and all I see are those topsoil diagrams from my textbooks in school. And I had Al explain it to me probably like 10 different times. And there was one time that I understood it for all of like 5 minutes, and then and so I used to talk to Troy Lightfoot about them all the time, and Troy would like try to make it make sense. Didn't work. I read Dan's books. Dan's books make sense. The pictures, I can't. My brain doesn't handle it. So I know that you are like the cumulative flow whisperer, and I would like you to help me figure out what these things actually say.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk about this. Before we go super deep into like what's on the chart, what's in there, and we'll look at a couple examples here. I think an important, I guess, disclaimer about cumulative flow diagrams is about how you use them.
Okay.
And I really look at them more as like if you were to look at the Doppler weather very zoomed out, right? You might be like, ooh, that red spot looks scary. Let's talk about what's going on here. Is it hail? Hail's present here? Is it a tornado? Is it a hurricane? But I probably wouldn't use it to really plan a whole lot of detail around like what I'm going to wear that afternoon until it got a lot closer. Right? Okay. So I think CFDs are kind of the same way. Like you zoom out and look at things like, oh, there's weird bubbles in weird places or spots where I see something flatline.
Mesocyclones appearing.
Yeah, those are the things that the CFD is good for. And then really what you need to do is double click on that and go talk to the team and figure out what's going on. Look at other metrics. Look at cycle time data. Look at your WIP. Look at your throughput. Because the CFD is really, it's kind of this high level view of all of those things working together. I'll get that in a moment here, but I wouldn't use it to try to forecast anything or to try to get really precise with any of those numbers. I would use it to go, oh, it looks like at the beginning of May, we doubled our WIP, and now we're seeing that our cycle time is slowly increasing. Let's talk about what happened. Did we have a bunch of new work come in and nothing left? Like what was going on around then for us? So I use it more like that than I do to try to do anything super precise. And so I think that's always an important caveat when we're looking at CFDs.
So the other diagrams and the other kind of ways of looking at stuff, they resonate more with me, and they seem like things that are more actionable to me.
Agree.
So that I'm not. I appreciate what you just said because it puts it in a context that I can kind of like, oh, that's why. All right. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about two things in the context of CFDs. The first is Little's Law, and the other is the airport.
Okay.
I think the airport makes us human. We're going into summer in the States, so lots of travel, lots of
people going to Dallas in July because who doesn't want to go there in July?
I know.
For the Agile conference.
I also have to go to Orlando in July. It's like the two hottest places to be in July. So when we talk about Little's Law, I think everybody knows kind of the general part of Little's Law here, that average throughput equals our average work in progress divided by our approximate average cycle time, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the Little's Law equation, and it's great. And we talk about the relationship between those three flow metrics a lot in our courses. Okay. But there's kind of this other part of Little's Law that we tend to not include in that. And that's what is referred to as Little's Law assumptions. And there's a couple. One is that we're using consistent units of measure, and that one's kind of obvious. So we're tracking everything in days, or we're tracking everything in hours. that all three of those are done in the same units of measure. The other ones are that your arrival rate and your departure rate should be consistent all the time. So this is where we're going to talk about the airport. So think of those times when your plane has landed, especially in Denver. That's where I am. We've probably had a lot of time on the tarmac here because planes land and there's no gate available to park. When that is happening, our arrival rate is outstripping our departure rate. So there's nowhere for us to pull the plane up to the gate.
Right.
When we think about Little's Law, we're assuming that the arrival rate and the departure rate are staying consistent. And we'll look at that on the chart in a minute.
And not just from the gate, but from taking off or landing as well. Like you could pull back from the gate because I think that's what they try to do with the reports. Like, oh, we were on time, we pulled back from the gate, but then we sat on the tarmac for 2 hours before we flew.
Right. Yeah, and at some point, you're going to end up with too many planes on the tarmac, right? And then you can't take in new planes.
Yeah.
There's only so much real estate they have to park them out there. They can't park them in the dirt, although I think they might like to try. The next one is that all the work that comes into the system should leave the system, right? So things aren't coming in and then getting abandoned.
That would never happen.
Parked. Right. And then the last two here, I think, are the ones that we tend to ignore the most, or maybe we're just not familiar with. And one is that our WIP should be stable. So if arrival rate and departure rate is consistent, that means the amount of planes there is also staying consistent. One's coming in, one's leaving, one's coming in, one's leaving.
And WIP is work in process or progress, however you want to say it.
Work in process, work in progress. It's how much is there. And so if our arrival rate starts outstripping our departure rate, our WIP is changing, right? So if we have more work coming in and nothing's leaving, all of a sudden we have more work that's in progress.
Yeah.
And the other piece of that, and the flow metric that we probably love the most over at ProKanban, is work item age. The other Little's Law assumption is that your work item age is neither increasing or decreasing, so it's staying pretty consistent. And that's the one that's very easy to ignore. Even if your WIP is consistent, let's say we have 4 items in progress.
Right.
We could have 3 items that are moving in and out.
By and the one that just sits there.
And one that just sits there. And if that one is just sitting there, it's aging on your board. And so one of the metrics we really talk a lot about making visible is work item age. And so that is a big part then of managing arrivals and departures, is to make sure that the age of stuff on your board isn't also increasing past a certain threshold for your team.
So can I ask a question about that really quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's say that I have 4 items in process and one of them's just the one that just won't move. Then even though it's not blocking us we're still moving cards, but the idea would be that we would swarm on that one that was like stuck in the mud and just get that out of the game.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, even when we're working with Scrum or any Agile practices, I think I still see a lot of organizations focus a lot on individual utilization, right? So we're still very focused on, like, does every developer have a ticket? Does everybody have something to do? And so sometimes it's shifting away from the thinking that because I have available capacity, the next best thing for me to do is pull new work, and to say the most important thing for me to do with available time or capacity is going to be to figure out what's going on with that ticket that's stuck, right? And it might be that I pair with you, or that I partner with you, or help pick something up so that we can get that ticket done. But my last resort should be pulling in a new ticket.
And isn't part of it also, like, I'm just thinking about the airport thing, that I should be ready for new work. Like, I always feel like we're waiting for the people that, the folks need wheelchairs to get on the plane. You're always waiting for the attendants to come and take them down to the plane. Like, they're running around like crazy. There should be enough of them that people don't have to wait.
Yeah. And a lot of that is in finding the right WIP limits. One of the things we see a lot is people wanting to try to plug numbers into Little's Law to figure out what your WIP limit should be. Like, there's a magic equation. Everybody's always like, just tell me what it is. And I'm like, I don't know the answer. But some of it is exactly what you just said. It's figuring out what is the right amount of work in progress for our team, so that work is not sitting idle, and that people are not sitting idle. And that can sometimes mean that you have to play with it a little bit to say, do we need a little bit more work to pull in because we have people with nothing to do? That's not great. But also, if work is idle, then that probably means your WIP is too high, right? Because we're pulling work in, but there's nobody available to do the work.
So figuring out, it's kind of sometimes like this seesaw thing. Like, it's not like you just, that's the answer. You have to try experiments.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think for new teams, you want to use your cycle time as kind of an indicator for how long you would want or how frequently you would want to change it. I think because we're also programmed to do retrospectives every 2 weeks, I see a lot of teams that try to change their WIP limits every 2 weeks, and sometimes that's too frequent. I think,
Okay.
you need a chance to, especially if your cycle time is greater than 14 days, which it is for a lot of teams.
Yeah.
You need a chance to get that data back to help you figure out if you should be moving it up or down. So I usually try to keep it consistent for at least a month before making any changes.
Okay. Can you explain cycle time for the folks that are not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cycle time is how long did it take for me to complete a work item? So from when that work started to when it was finished.
Okay.
And that probably sounds a little ambiguous, and it is on purpose, because your team needs to define what start and finish is for the work that you do. Some teams define it as when it hits the to-do column. So it's prioritized, the timer starts.
Right.
Some organizations refer to that as lead time. I tend to avoid lead time because at the end, it's all cycle time. And when we use the term lead time, we often use it with conviction that I'm using it the same way you're using it. We're all talking about
Like
when the
MVP.
request-
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, very similar to MVP. So we're all using it the same way. But when you start digging, it's like, well, we count lead time from when the customer requested it, and we count it from when the PO put it in the backlog, and we count it. So it's like, it's all cycle time.
Yeah.
Let's just have a conversation about start and finish points. And there
Okay.
can be more than one. So some teams will track cycle time from when
One
it's told by
state to the
development.
next. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they'll track it to when it's deployed, and then they'll also track like when it's ready to be deployed, right? So it's like
Okay.
our work is done. It's not in production yet, but we want to know how long did our piece take basically to be ready for deployment. And
Okay.
a lot of times I see patterns around, it kind of depends on the deployment process for the organization, what they consider that finish point to be.
And I just want to highlight one thing just because it's stuck in my head and I can't stop myself from talking sometimes. If work is moving through multiple states, my group is really fast. We're getting it all done, but it's totally jamming up the next group. I can't be walking around like, oh, look how fast we are, because we're just overloading the system and not helping anything.
Right. And that's a great thing that you would see in your cumulative flow diagram, right? So I often like to say that nobody likes piles of laundry, piles of leaves, piles of dog stuff. Unless it's piles of cash, no one wants it.
Piles of beer.
Piles of beer, piles of whiskey might be interesting. I don't know how you pile that, but I'd be willing to try.
It'd be a good experiment.
Yeah. But so when we start thinking about piles, that's exactly what you just said. So where are there buildups in the system? That's a great thing to visualize through your CFD. So you can start to see where the color bands go up and to the right. If one starts to go like this, that's an increase in work at one point of your system.
Okay.
So that's a great place to kind of, like I said, double click and go back and say, what's going on here where all of a sudden we have increased the amount of work in one part of our system, but nothing's moving through now to the other part.
So it's not necessarily that one section going kind of pear-shaped is a bad thing so much as it is something you want to ask questions about and understand.
I don't think it's a great thing, honestly, but
Okay.
I mean, it's something I would go dig into. So
Okay.
it kind of depends on how much we're talking about too. Like what I often see in a CFD is that pear shape builds up. And then you see the lines come together and
Triangles.
go straight up.
Okay.
like everything moved in a blob and then left the system at the same time. That can be an indication that our stories were too dependent on each other. They couldn't be tested individually, right? So that buildup meant something, or that they were all blocked together.
It just
So
sounds
that's
like the
where
whole
it's-
thing needs a bran muffin.
Yeah, exactly. Let's take a look at this picture. I think I'm talking a lot with my hands, and I think this might help us here.
So while you're pulling it up, I want to ask a question. So with what you just described, where stuff gets blocked up and then it all gets like evacuated from the system at one time, that's something that you would be looking at a trend over like a period of time. Like this keeps happening. Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of a pattern that you would want to dig into with your team to say, why is all of this, what's happening here that we're getting this big pile up of stuff and then everything's leaving at the same time. You could also look at that in your cycle time scatter plot. So you would probably start to see that the age of your work is starting to take longer and then all finish on the same day.
Yeah.
That can be a sign that you've got some of those dependencies.
Okay.
Work item age would probably be a great tool here too, because when we're looking at work in your scatter plot, that's work that's completed, right? Cycle time is only for work that's done. That's where work item age becomes so important and often like very sobering for a lot of teams because it feels like work is moving and it feels like we're completing all of the things we need to. But then all of a sudden you're like, has that ticket really been in progress for 45 days? Like that can't be right. That's the first thing I always hear. That can't be right. So, like,
But it is.
Yeah, but so when we start digging into that stuff, I think that's where just making a couple key metrics more visible to the team starts to drive some of that.
Okay.
The pile up out. Your brand muffin, the Kanban brand muffin. I like that. I picked this visual. This is actually from an Adobe website, but I picked this one because I thought it was a really nice graphic and very simple. Like you said, a lot of CFDs that you go to look at can be 20 colors and they're all over the place. Like, what exactly am I looking at? So a couple things here, you got banded colors for the columns of your board. This one is super simple. We have to do in the teal or the top line, work that's in progress in that light blue in the middle, and then done at the bottom.
Okay.
It's probably worth noting that your cumulative flow diagram should always go up and to the right because done is always increasing. I have seen ones where you can like remove the done column and then the lines go down, and that's not super accurate or helpful when we're thinking about how our work is leaving the system.
Okay. So the vertical markers for time, this could be like days or weeks or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think most tools will show this to you in days out of the box. I haven't seen a lot go down to hours or anything like that for the type of work that we do. And then the horizontal time vertical axis here is going to be the number of items. So that's just a raw count. And you could look at this for stories, features, epics, bugs. You can look at these for all different types of work items. And what you'll see here is if I were to start connecting the dots here across the top line, I'm going to get the arrival rate of work coming in. So that top level line is the arrival rate. The bottom level line here is the departure rate. And you can already start to see on this one, if these aren't always parallel, right? If the arrival
So they should be parallel.
They should be parallel. Yeah.
Okay.
That's that Little's Law assumption that the work coming in the system is leaving the system at a consistent rate. But if work coming into the system is increasing and things aren't leaving and those lines are starting to diverge and go like this, you can see here where we have this vertical line here. That is how much work in progress you have. So the distance between your done column and your first in progress column there, that's going to be an actual count of your work in progress. So I can see over here, the distance between these two lines is smaller than it is here or than it is over here. So my arrival rate's increasing, but my departure rate's not increasing with it. So the amount of work in progress in the light blue row there is increasing. You can also draw this really interesting triangle here that really highlights Little's Law. And that shows you here that the top line here, if I draw a line from the amount of work in progress, the vertical line, all the way over to the first point of done, that's going to give me my approximate average cycle time. So if this is our time access here, we'll just say each dash is a day. That would tell me my approximate average cycle time for the work completed here was about 4 days.
Okay.
And then since this one is counting, if we're going off the marks on this grid, 2 items in progress, I could also see that this line across is going to start to show me my average throughput rate. And so that's throughput rate and departure rate, same thing. Throughput rate is often not a whole number when we're looking at it in terms of days. So for a lot of teams, our throughput rate might be something like 2.5 items a day or 1.7 items a day. And that's what you're going to get out of this line here. This is going to start to tell us if I were to divide this number here by this number here, I should get an average throughput rate of how much work is leaving the system here.
Can I ask a question about this right now?
Yeah,
absolutely. This is the part where my head starts to spin a little bit. What does all that tell you? Like, what does it give you?
Great. So if we go back and you asked me to find some ugly ones, and so I might still try to pull one up here that would give you some heartburn. But what we're really looking for are those bubbles. Like you said, where is that whip line, the vertical distance between one color line and another color line on this chart getting really big? Because that's when stuff's piling up at some point in our system. I'm going to go ahead and pull.
So while you're pulling up the other thing, so I'm just trying to think like because later on tonight or tomorrow, I'm going to go back and see if I can actually like make sense of this stuff. So what the first thing that I'm going to be looking for is a place where the WIP limit is expanding or contracting beyond what seems to be normal, where I don't have that parallel arrival departure thing. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
So let's, I'm full disclosure here. We're looking at a simulated version of Actionable Agile.
Okay.
Pull this up. This is what we use for our training classes. So it's sitting on top of test data. So there's nothing in this that is any customer facing information.
Okay.
So on this one, you can see the dates here across the bottom. The number.
Yeah, this is the stuff that gives me a splitting headache.
Yeah. So this one, so think about what we just looked at on that other CFD, right? This top level here, this is our first column on the board.
Okay.
These are just named after colors to try to get us to stop thinking about what the column should or
But the
shouldn't
parallels would be like design, development, this kind of QA, whatever.
Yeah. So red could be to do, red finished, blue active could be developed. You could have a dev done column could be the red, and then green could be testing. So if that were true, I would probably look right here. So it looked like, things are kind of consistent through here, and then a bunch moved into blue active.
Yeah.
And it looks like while blue active was trying to do their work and clear that out, a bunch of stuff came into red active. So if that's our to-do column, I would probably want to talk about, like, why did we batch all this stuff into the to-do column at once? For the dependencies, like what happened there. And then you can kind of see the same thing here. So a bunch goes into red finished all at once. And that kind of makes sense if it's dependency related, right? It could be that these were all connected and then they all moved here together. And then it looks like they all moved here together. So you see the blob kind of move.
Yeah.
Right.
The
It starts
mass.
more in blue. And then we see the blob moving all the way across. So if I were to zoom in on the work that took place from basically right here to right here, I would want to talk to the team about what happened there. Maybe we had an issue with how we split the work up. Maybe there were dependencies that we couldn't avoid. But it looks like if you were to take that middle band out, basically from right about here to right about over here, and if I were to delete that part, everything else is going up and to the right. Right below that, I could have gotten up and to the right. I do after that, but that one section there. So that would be a great thing to start looking at with the team. So between, let's see, May 10th and May 30th, like what happened for us?
Okay. So can I ask a couple of questions about this?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to try to compare it to some simple stuff in my head. Like a burn down chart is a really simple real-time indicator of like how much is not finished, how much time do we have left. With this, I think I'm assuming it's like a lagging indicator that I would be looking at in the retrospective or whatever. And I'm using it as a tool to tell me where things might smell weird and I need to go investigate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the work that's showing up here is going to show us work completed, kind of, because it's also showing us how much work is in progress. So the work in progress isn't work that's done necessarily, but it could be work that's still in the system.
So does that ever happen that you're working on something and you're like in the middle of it, like where that the red finished, the light blue color is, where right above where you are, where it gets kind of like wider, where we would go like, what's happening to us right now?
Yeah, I mean, all of these sections I would probably want to dig into. So like this part looks pretty good where these are kind of consistent. A lot of times you'll see a big flat line because a bunch of stuff maybe moved to done together. So these might be like the stair steps could be releases or could be where a bunch of stuff was batched at the same time. But like I said, I mean, there's a lot. I can ask a lot of good questions from this, but I think if I'm trying to drive actual action with the team, my best bet's still going to be to look at aging work in progress. So for the work that's on our board, how old is it? And are we being consistent with the amount of work in our system? So are we keeping our WIP limits consistent? So the work coming in, we're only pulling work in when work leaves.
Okay. Does this ever also tell you that your work types or work columns are flawed?
It could. I think one of the things, so right away looking at this board, one of the things I would probably want to ask about is how we're using those finished columns. Do they have WIP limits on it? A lot of times I see teams have a column for like, complete, and they're shoving work into a finished column so that they can keep pulling work, and then overloading test. It looks like, let me turn that one off. It looks like in here, red, let's see, we've got a blue, it's the colors don't match the names. This is actually confusing. Red finished and blue finished kind of have some pile ups here. And so I would probably want to ask the team, like, maybe our WIP limits are too high on those columns and work is getting parked there unnecessarily.
Or they're bringing in things that are too big and they just sit. It takes them a couple of days and then they push it off to the next group.
Yeah.
Okay.
One other cool thing you can see in this particular tool, unfortunately, I don't think Jira provides this, but you can also see those arrival rate and departure rate lines that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So you can see here.
Wow. Yeah.
It's arrival rate is 0.46 items a day, and the departure rate is 0.3. So not a huge discrepancy, but enough that work is aging somewhere here.
Yeah.
So you still have more work coming in than you have leaving. I often see these numbers look like sometimes double the departure rate or the throughput rate. And so that can be probably like one of the best things that you could use from this chart would be just to focus on that, like getting our arrival rate and departure rate more consistent. And we do that by keeping our WIP consistent.
Okay. So I'm going to look for the WIP kind of shifting. I'm going to look for discrepancies between arrival and departure rate, and look for big chunks of stuff that just seems to like be congealing somewhere in the work system, and we needed to find some way to get it out of the system.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah. And like I said, think of this as, I might, if I'm going to coach a new team or work with a new team, I might go look at some of this stuff to try to see like, oh, where do I see some areas where I think we should focus first? Just like you said, like, maybe having a conversation about our workflow states. Are these the right workflow states? Are the WIP limits where they should be? Are they too high on some columns or too low on other columns? But I use this more as like a high level map of where to focus first, like and what
diagnostic kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Then trying to really drill into a lot of the precise numbers here.
Okay. What are the things that people misunderstand about these the most? I mean, other than people like me who are just like, whatever. People misread them, misinterpret them. What do they get wrong?
I think probably the biggest thing is just not knowing what good looks like, right? And so it's like, we can look at these charts all day, but one of the first questions I usually get is, like you said, I don't know what I'm looking at with all the blobs and all the colors, and what is good and what is bad look like. I think if we're trying to teach like what's an ideal CFD look like, it's that everything's going up and to the right and the bands are not going like this. They're kind of all kind of going up and to the right. That tells me that you have a really stable Kanban system, that your WIP limits are pretty consistent, that you're managing the flow of work through each stage of your workflow, and that you're not pulling work in until something leaves. Okay. So you're kind of not breaking those WIP limits. It might help you see in here, like, if our arrival rate is increasing and our departure rate's not keeping pace with it, that's obviously going to tell me that there's probably work somewhere in the system aging. I'm going to have a hard time getting that from here. I would need to go look at work item age for that. And that's where, I think everybody gets kind of panicky with new tools and new data and new charts to look at. And it's like, well, I don't have actionable Agile, or I don't want to create a CFD by hand. We were talking about that earlier. I think one of the best things I usually recommend teams do is put the date that you start a ticket, just put it in front of the title of the ticket when you pull it into in progress, and leave it there, so that when we're having a conversation about the work in flight, I can look at the tickets with the oldest date first. It's,
wow, okay.
Very low tech, and it's not very sexy, but it's a way to start that conversation. Because I think without having a way to see how old each ticket is, it's really easy to lose track of that.
And even if it was back to the days before the pandemic when we were all working with Post-its on a board, if I wrote the start date and the date that it was released on the Post-its, I could gather all those together and look at what a normal throughput rate would be.
Yep.
Right. And then where are there things that are off from that, and where do I need, and why did that happen? Because it's understanding the system. And I guess one of the things that I'm taking away from this is I do have a lot of people that come into class that want to figure out what to tell the team their velocity should be. And, it's always like, you have to be careful with those conversations. But this is not a predictive tool. It's more of a post Like now, I mean, I guess you could use it real time, but it's analyzing what happened yesterday's weather, basically.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I like how you said it. It's really diagnostic. It's helping me kind of go, oh, wait, do we have a problem here? Should we have a conversation about this?
Yeah.
Where are the things that we need to go back and revisit as a team to just help our process run better? I think Kanban can sometimes get a bad rap for being so data heavy that we're not paying attention to the people, but really I think it is data heavy because of the people.
Yeah.
I want to use this chart to go, oh, geez, whatever blue is, let's say blue was the blue active on this particular chart. That's the yellow band. Let's say that's development. Well, it looks like right around, I don't know, May 18th, 19th, they probably had a pretty shitty week. Because look at all the stuff that was on their plate, right? Almost all of the work in the system was in that column on the board. And so if I can use the data to, like you said, make a more humane workplace where we're trying to make sure we're not burning people out and that we're working at a consistent, reasonable pace where stuff is coming in and leaving regularly, then that's really what the data is for.
And so you just gave me this idea of like trying to combine this with like a Nico board or something like that, where we're looking at how people feel every day.
Yeah,
what's
that'd be
happening
a cool
here.
way to overlap them.
And just to make it like for people like me, you want to see if stuff goes like a horn, that's bad. And if you have chunks of stuff, that's bad.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking for blobs.
Sorry, I'm trying to make it as basic as I possibly can.
Technical. Blobs and lines. Yeah. No, I mean that's exactly it. So it's like where things are flatlining, things aren't moving, and where things drop, where you have the big horizontal or vertical drop, like we did in kind of one spot, like right here. It's like everything moved into the next phase pretty much all together.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's I would say more often than not, that tends to be something around your deployment process or your release process and the quality of how your stories are written. I think we spent so much time talking about getting stories small as possible, but sometimes I think they can be too small. And then you see this, where you've made them so small that you've actually made them almost into subtasks at that point, and they're so small that they can't move without 5 other stories. Because they're also tightly coupled.
Wow.
And that really does more of a disservice because we can't move things to done and pull new work in. Now we've created that own, like you were saying, we've created our own logjam in the system by having things so decoupled that they're not dependent on each other.
This is great. I really appreciate you taking time to walk me through this. I feel like I understand it a lot better than I did at the top of the hour.
That's awesome.
I'm going to have to test myself in the next couple days, though. See if it sticks.
I think they're really cool. I mean, like I said, I think a lot. If I'm channeling Dan Vacanti, he would say never use them, and I think the reason is because nobody knows what they're looking at on there.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I think people try to get very precise with a lot of the data that's here instead of just going, "Oh, this is interesting." Like, let's like talk. Let's have a conversation about what this is telling us and how things are moving, and like use that to help us get better with our practices as a team.
Are there any resources that people could go to like to test their ability to interpret them?
No, that'd be fun though.
Maybe a micro cert in that.
We call them small batch certifications because of our love of whiskey. So, we have small batches.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have anything specific to CFDs. I mean, we do touch on them in classes and we talk about exactly what we talked about here about the relationships and what it's telling you at a high level.
Yeah.
I don't know of any specific certifications or ways to test your knowledge about what you're seeing here, other than some of the kind of basics we just talked about. Like, what does good look like? We do that in some of our classes. We'll show a couple different CFDs and be like, which of these 3 would you want to be the team that
you're
working
is really
with?
bad. Yeah.
This one or the one that's like all over the place? It's like rainbow.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you. Now I know you've got a bunch of stuff going on at ProKanban. I want to make sure we talk about that too. So what's happening?
Yeah, we do have a bunch of stuff going on at ProKanban. We actually just launched a new course. It's called Accelerating Product Value.
Okay.
excited about it. It's very different than I think a lot of the product courses that are out there right now. It really takes kind of an economic view on understanding what have we invested in the products that we're building and how quickly can we see a return on that investment.
Wow.
To borrow from Marty Kagan, right? A return doesn't always mean product value. It doesn't always mean we hit the nail on the head.
Right.
That return can sometimes mean learning that we shipped the wrong thing. And so I think, especially right now, there's, everybody's cutting budgets, everybody's pulling back practices of things like product discovery, and some of those roles are going away. Some of the budget to do that well is going away. And so what's the fastest way we can find out if we're delivering the right thing or not? It's to get it small and to ship it frequently. So the whole class is really about that. How do we make a bunch of small bets with the products we're delivering so that we can learn and learn fast and then fold that feedback in quickly? I think that's probably the thing that most organizations do wrong.
Yeah.
They might have a great process for getting things out the door fast and getting that feedback quickly, but then they pack a product roadmap so full of features that they have no time to respond to the feedback that they're getting. And so that's really where I think Kanban comes into play and can help organizations do that well. It's like you want to have this well-oiled machine of like ship something fast, get the feedback, and then be able to put that feedback right into action, into new features or new bets.
So does this also help all the organizations that don't know how to define value for themselves?
I wish
you mentioned a couple different ways you could understand value. And I know that in the Agile community before cost of delay, that was like this big loop where nobody made any sense.
Yeah. I think we really take the stance that value is kind of in the eyes of your customer. And that your customer's usually wrong. And so you can ask customers.
It's up to them, and whatever they said is garbage.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just kind of a shift in thinking. I'm a big fan of product discovery, and I love being part of that process early on, but it's not always the best indicator of what people are going to do with their wallets at the end of the day. And we use a bunch of different case studies in the class of things where it's like the customer said one thing, or they said that they hated something and then went and did something exactly opposite in the actual market. And it's like, the fastest way to figure that out might not be spending 6 months doing product discovery. It's probably spending 1 month shipping something small and getting feedback from them in production.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I want to, because this is the opposite of what I tell all my students in class, and what you said makes sense, that sometimes rather than doing a whole bunch of research, you should just build something quick and launch it and see what happens when it's live.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. That's great. That's a nice contrast. I'll have to correct myself, all my students.
Well, it's hard, and I think I've also been in the camp of advocating for a long time to focus on product discovery and give yourself that time up front to really understand, are we building the right thing? And I think you can do that. You can still make time and space to do that. But I think the really important part is not spending 6 months doing that and then 6 months building something and then getting it out and finding out that you just lost a year, right? How do you do that all faster, right? And that's that concept of making those really small bets with everything you're shipping and delivering. Is you could still do some discovery work, but how do we take that as quickly as possible, turn that into something that is in front of the customers, so that we can keep iterating on that or pivot away from it as quickly as possible.
So not fail fast, but learn fast.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's failing in there.
Well, yeah, I mean, failure is going to be part of it, but I think so many people get swept up in the idea of just run lots of bad experiments that they forget that the whole point of the experiments in the first place is to learn something.
Right.
And you can get better at that. Okay.
Right. And like I said, I think the learning part, I feel like maybe we put too much of a spotlight on the learning piece over the last five years or so, to the point that the learning is great, but it has nowhere to go because we didn't change how we deliver and how we plan, right? So we spend all this time planning out roadmaps and planning out all the features we're going to ship, and then maybe doing some discovery theater to be like, we tested this and it's already on the roadmap. So whatever happens, we still have 8 more features that are coming after that because they're already on the roadmap.
They're there, yeah.
So it's like we're kind of doing some discovery work, but it doesn't matter because we planned a year's worth of stuff to ship, and that's the part where I think.
Well, you'll know in advance that they're not going to sell. I guess that's good to prepare. Faster. You know when to send out your resume. You have that.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think it's really all about the whole system there and making a system that it can pivot easily. And that's the part where I think we're we're taking kind of a hard stance against all of the activities that usually go into planning and trying to predict value and saying, you know what, let's just focus on shipping fast and learning quickly, and then having a system that enables us to respond to that feedback as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Instead of this long cycle of trying to, like you said, like define and predict value up front.
Yeah. Cool. Well, and so if people want to learn more about the course, like how do they do that?
Yeah, we've got a couple in-person classes. I'm super excited to be teaching with Alex Priestley in London on June 7th, I think 18th and 19th is when that course is running. And then we'll be running one in Denver on June 23rd and 24th. And that one's in partnership with Crafted, which is an amazing product-driven development shop.
Cool.
So we're super excited to be working with them on this in-person offering. It'll be at their headquarters. And then there's lots of online opportunities to take the course as well. So lots of trainers are getting certified for this at the moment and starting to offer virtual versions of it as well. So if traveling to London or Denver isn't in the books and you don't want to hang out on the tarmac at DAA, you can take it online in the comfort of your own sweatpants. All
right. Well, cool. Thank you very much. And to track you down or learn more about any of the other things that you've got going on, they can go to prokanban.org, right?
Yeah, definitely. ProKanban.org. And if you'd like to join our Slack community, it's open to the public. It's the easiest way to get in touch with me directly, or just to reach out to other people who are interested in learning more about CFDs and work item age and how to forecast or how to deliver products faster. So it's a great, I think we have well over 1,000 people in there now.
Wow, that's awesome.
Tends to be pretty responsive. Everything from tool questions of like how to hack data out of Jira to things like how do I convince management that we should move away from story points, like all topics.
Or what is this blobby thing in the middle of my CFD?
What is this blob? Where do I apply the brand muffin?
Exactly.
Yeah, all of that up for grabs.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Colleen. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dave.